so I think we're going to be okay. And then we're going to go to the shared screen slideshow. And just want to check now, can everybody see that slideshow there on their screen? Just give me a thumbs up, a few of you, to make sure everyone's got it. Yeah, great. Okay, I'm going to assume, as several of you have done thumbs up, that everybody can get it. So this, obviously, this webinar is about CBT, but although I know it was probably advertised in different places with slightly different names, like why CBT is provides solutions for mental health crisis, etc. But I'm really leading on this with the COVID mental health crisis. And I'm doing that because actually I am concerned. One of my main motivations myself is to actually help people to be live happy, self-empowered lives, to thrive. And let's face it, the last couple of years have been something that we haven't seen possibly ever, and certainly not since wartime, since really major things have happened that affect people really badly. And so I'm concerned that people know about what the most effective solutions are to help them, especially in a time of crisis, or they've been going through things that they never thought that they'd have to go through before. And I've got a couple of slides to go through some of the figures on that to back up what I'm saying. You'll find with me, I'm into all the, I'm into holistic work. I'm very much about let's have a go and see what works. But I'm also well grounded in theory. I mentioned, and a few of you who know me already will know that that I have an academic background as well. I've been a dean in research university in the UK. I've been a director setting up the first actually private women's university in Bahrain. So I've worked across the Middle East for nearly 20 years, as well as in the UK for many years before that, in most levels of education, but mostly further and higher education. So I am concerned about what works. If I say anything in this webinar that seems to you contentious, or it sounds like it goes against the mainstream media orthodoxy, the reason I'm saying it is not because I like to just believe everything I read on Twitter or Facebook, but because I have spent most of the last 2 years actually researching things, some of which I already knew about and some of which I've learned a lot more about. So when I talk to you and I talk about CBT, I have to talk about reason and logic and the scientific method. And the problem with the last couple of years is that when they say follow the science, and experts say you need to do a bit of digging into what that actually means, because these words are words. And any of you, I don't know if any of you have done any NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, but NLP and CBT go hand in glove together, because what they look at is actually when we say things, what do we mean? What do we base that on? So I'm really concerned to do things that help people to get results that work. So I'm going to explore in this webinar a bit of the background, why CBT is most widely recommended therapy to provide effective solutions. And that's actually true. Most doctors, health professionals will actually recommend people who are suffering particularly from anxiety, depression, stress, etc. CBT, they'll say, is probably the most recommended therapy because there's so much research base to show that it works, which a lot of counseling and psychotherapy and various different models, it's not my job to knock them, but to say they actually don't really have any much evidence that they really work or that they make a difference. A lot of people understand after having therapy or counseling for ages, they understand their problems, they have more insight, but they don't have actually really sound techniques for how to change those problems. And I often like to quote Woody Allen. Some of you may have heard of him, getting on a bit now, so I remember a lot of these people have been around a long time, like me. And regardless of whatever's been said about him, I have no personal knowledge about whether he's done sexual abuse or anything else. But what I do know is he's a filmmaker that's made a lot of very successful movies in their comedies. And right from the outset, it's been a lot of it's about hang-ups, people's hang-ups. And he himself is very open about his hang-ups: fear of death, fear of powerful women, fear of having a small penis. And he makes very funny movies about these sorts of themes. But the fact is, he's still in therapy. He understands his problems, but he's still got them. So in CBT, we're interested in helping people to get over their problems so that they have solutions that work for them. So this is what we would call applied positive psychology. So a little bit of background. I'm not going to talk about myself too much, more about the topic in hand, but just so that you know, this is a crowded slide, but it's like that so that you can see all of these are national, UK, or sometimes USA, like NACBT, Canadian down there. So all of these are the sorts of people that we work with that accredit our courses, that actually we make sure that there's a quality assurance. So anything that is a qualification course, obviously not workshops and introductory things like this, but anything where we run a course or run a training that leads to a qualification, it is based on a professional background, of quality standards, and we mostly work to UK standards for the therapy part of what we do, because that's where we come from. And actually, I think the UK, I honestly think this, because although I'm a Brit, I'm not particularly say that everything about the UK is brilliant. But what I think is quite good about the UK is it's got a framework of regulation, but it's mostly self-regulation rather than legally coming down and making everything too rigid. Whereas in places like the States, some states, things are not regulated at all. In others, you can't even call something hypnotherapy, for example, because they don't accept it exists. Others, you can only talk to people and counsel them if you've got a degree or master's degree. So it's very patchy in some places. So the UK is pretty consistent. So when we say world-class accredited training and consultancy in counseling, therapy, coaching, and NLP, emotional intelligence, various things that we do, I can actually say, you can check out with these people, we're registered with them, or we're accredited by them, we're accredited training center. So it's not just Mickey Mouse, someone who read a book, someone who went on a weekend seminar and then sets up as a trainer. And unfortunately, there's an awful lot of that goes on, particularly in places like the Middle East, where there isn't really a history or a background of 100 years or so of psychology and psychotherapy training. Just in case you think, well, she could say that, she could say anything, just so that you know, we're actually a Transformations Institute, which collaborates with Illuminations, but we are an institute in our own right, for been in the Middle East for the best part of 20 years, and in working primarily in Dubai and the UAE for the last 10 years or so, coming on to 11 now. This is just to show you that here, what we're getting there, you might see it there, it's a bit hard because it's glass, you can see through it. That's actually an award for School of the Year. And the person giving it to us is Terence Watts, who's the chair of one of the major professional associations. And we're showing off a bit because in case you can't see that, that's the Ritz in London. So we got this award when we visited London. So APHP accredits schools around the world that teach professional hypnotherapy, psychotherapy courses. And on 2 occasions, we've been actually selected as the best school of the year for the quality and the quantity of the people that we train, our successful graduates that come out. So it's not just us saying we think they're good, but our peers and some of the leaders in the field would actually say, yup, Transformations Institute does a really good job, and their therapists and their coaches, the people they train, actually are doing a really good job. Many are working in the Middle East, but also many of them now work around the world, have gone back home in some cases, or have traveled, etc. And of course, now that things are online, it means that more and more people are coming from around the world. So to get into the body of what we're talking about, when I say we're in the middle of what's referred to in some places as a COVID mental health case, crisis, you can see the kinds of imagery that we're surrounded by nowadays, and it's very much based around emotional responses of, as you can see, anxiety and fear. And as we go through, I've got a fair bit to cover, but if anyone wants to chip in or ask a question about anything I say, please feel free. And if I'm about to cover it, I'll tell you. But if we pick up some of the themes here, we'll see this focus on germs, on viruses, on pollutants. We're actually running a course in March for those who are interested in that topic on eating disorders and OCD. And that one, it's nowadays quite a tricky one to work with people with OCD with germophobia, which is one of the main things that people, are obsessed with, is the idea of being, getting germs, getting disease. This is a field day for people who are now turning around and saying, look, I was right all along. See, the germs are out to get us. I need to wash my hands over and over and over again. Otherwise, I'll catch something and I might die. So we look at here the idea of distancing. And if you think about people are social creatures. We know that. We know that we like to have friends, to have family, to have people to interact with. We're not just loners and hermits. And so keeping your distance from people causes people to feel very, very stressed and uncomfortable. And for me, one of the saddest things about all of this, and you'll see a few images of children here, and I'm a mum of grown-up children. I have granddaughters, one grown-up and herself a mum, and another one who's a young one, and I have 3 great-grandchildren. I'm extremely concerned about the fact that children are very, very anxious and nervous and say things like, I didn't want to kill my grandmother. Oh no, maybe it's my fault, because kids tend to think everything is their fault up to a certain age anyway. Of course, once they get to be teenagers, it's all your fault. For those of you who are parents who know that very well. But when they're little, they think it's all about them. So we've seen children wearing masks, which again, and I'm happy to give anyone who wants this research evidence, as long as your arm on this, masks are actually very harmful to wear for any period of time, and especially for children. And so this is a health problem in itself. But also the idea you can't play together. You've got images here of elderly people, perhaps grannies, great-grandmothers like me, who are unfortunate enough not to be relatively healthy like me, and having to be in homes or care homes and isolated, not being able to be there. My husband's brother, elder brother, his only brother, died in January last year, and nothing to do with COVID, but he died unexpectedly. And we weren't able to be there for the funeral. My husband was supposed to be the executor, had to get someone else to take that on. We had to watch the funeral through live stream. We had to see him in the mortuary, in the funeral director's mortuary, via a mobile phone. My husband had to record the eulogy that was given at his funeral, and then that was then played at the funeral, and we had to watch it on live stream TV. Now, some of you have been through your own stories, but I'm honestly sharing some of our own so that you know. I've lost a very good friend recently, the wife of another good friend, etc. None of the ones actually that I've known have been COVID related at all, but again, it doesn't really matter what someone dies of. Those of you who've lost someone will know if they die, they die. It's painful, and the idea that you can't be with them is very difficult. So I put these images up just to emphasize that this climate, this atmosphere of anxiety and fear is something that breeds mental health difficulties on a massive scale. So I'm sure that most of you are aware of that. That's probably one of the reasons you come on the webinar, is to find out more about that and what we can do about it. So what is that stress response? Well, it's actually freeze, flight, or fight. And now, if you look at that, you'll see that there is a stress response going there. There'll be a moment of freezing. This is a primitive response that every human being has, that's for our survival. And I'll go into that a bit more in a minute. So I'm just going to ask those of you willing to unmute and say something. When you see that, what do you think you're going to do when you see that image suddenly appearing? It was supposed to fly out at the screen, but something went wrong with the animation. I don't know why it didn't. But you're there. You're that surfboarder, bodyboarder. You're lying on that surfboard and you see that image. What are you going to do?
Run.
Well, it'd be difficult to run. You're on the sea.
Swim.
You probably will want to paddle away. You might just stay frozen. It might be that you've watched, I don't know, a video, or you've even been on a training course that tells you what to do in the face of a shark attack. So you might actually go towards it and punch it on the nose because you saw something or read something about that, puts them off. But most people are going to either freeze or they're going to run away. A few people might actually fight back. And whatever you do you decide that consciously? Do you sit and do a kind of a pros and cons exercise, a decision tree analysis about whether you should stay where you are, whether you should run away, whether you should stay and fight? Do you think you're going to do any of that in that situation?
No. It's going to be on the spur of the moment.
You're going to be just doing it on an automatic reaction, right? Your subconscious mind, your non-conscious, in other words, below the level of your conscious human awareness. Oh, I apologize, my cuckoo clock's going off now. And for those in Dubai, you might think, why is it doing so many cuckoo clocks if she's 3 hours behind? That's because I have a cuckoo clock which shows the right time, but the cuckoo is an independent cuckoo and doesn't watch the mainstream media, and it thinks it's still in Dubai, and it does the same number of cuckoos as it would do in Dubai. So it's on Dubai time. So I apologize for that. It'll be quiet now for the next hour. Okay, so yeah, that will happen autopilot, right? Automatically that will happen, and you won't get a chance to stop and think about it. It will just happen according to whatever your subconscious or unconscious programming thinks is the best thing to give you a chance for survival, whether or not you do survive. So this automatic response is actually triggered by any perceived threat, and it is essential for our survival that we have that when we're faced with an actual life threat, a predator of some sort. As you can see, whether or not you understand about brains and so on, it doesn't really matter, but take it from me that you've got this thing called the reptile or lizard brain, which controls all the instinctive emotions that are there for our protection. Now, here's the big problem. And by the way, pre-COVID, I was still teaching all this same thing. Most situations in modern life, it is an overreaction, and it switches off the frontal lobes of the brain, which are the ones that enable us to actually apply logic and reason and critical thinking, to do the decision tree analysis, to do the pros and cons exercise, because as we know, yes, we want to listen to our heart, but also if we only listen to our heart and we don't allow our reason to come in, we can do some pretty stupid things. And we see that with crowd behavior, with mass psychosis, as sometimes people call it. And I want to say this in relation to the situation we've been in the last couple of years, is that actually, even if you did contract a very unpleasant kind of flu, a virus or whatever, you're very unlikely to drop dead in the next few minutes. And the problem is that this stress response is about that. It's designed to keep you going for just a few minutes, at the most maybe 10, 15 minutes or so, just to get you out of that situation. And then everything needs to return to normal, because if it doesn't, then you have a problem, a big problem. Because the alarm stage of stress put you on alert, that's fine. That's the meerkats going, looking around and going, giving off the alarm. Here comes the predator, here comes the lion or whatever, and all the meerkats disappear. So that's fine. You want the energy, you'll get an adrenaline rush that'll allow you to do things you might not be able to do normally, with this incredible strength to run away or to fight back, just temporarily to get you out of there. So that's fine, that's what it's for, although it's not very useful if you're in the office and the boss upsets you and you start to punch or you run out of the door. So actually, unless it's a life-threatening situation, it really isn't helpful to go into this stress response. Then we have what we call resistance, which is when stressful conditions persist. This is those of you who've ever been, say, bullied at work, or been in an unhappy relationship, or had financial problems or health challenges, and they go on and on and on. Then you start to find that your immune system starts to break down, doesn't work properly, that you start to get depressed and feel pessimistic about everything. You can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. This is what wears us down when we're in stressful conditions that keep persisting. And this is where health problems start to kick in. So for example, if you've heard, let's just say the whole COVID story is exactly as we've been told, right, fair enough that you're alarmed, you take notice and you decide, right, we need to do something about this. But if day after day after day, week after week after week, month after month after month, it's horror statistics, it's exaggerated largely in terms of the modeling is hopelessly wrong, the modeling about how many people would die. And we've had that on so many other things, foot and mouth disease, we've had it with avian flu, swine flu, Ebola, massive exaggerations done by computer programs that didn't take into account many kinds of factors, right? So when this goes on day after day, you get worn out, and after a while we get into the third stage of stress, which is collapse, burnout. I just can't cope. And this is where the mental health problems start to become really serious. So if we look at the people that we might go to for help because we're feeling totally stressed out, we've developed an eating disorder, we're self-harming. I've got a few statistics about that. And I don't know why it's not, sorry, I'm just flicking back because I had a slide that actually had statistics on, which is not actually coming up now. Okay, well, I'll have to correct that later. But anyway, just to say, this, the sorts of things that people have been going through include things like eating disorders, OCD, self-harming, depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, and we're seeing huge increases in the numbers of these. So when we look at the people that might help us here, all of these people on this list, I won't go through it in detail, all can incorporate CBT into their work, which is why I welcome people from all sorts of different backgrounds to come and train with us so that they can use CBT in the work with whatever work they're already doing with the skills they already have. Why do you think I've got an asterisk, a star by this first one on the list? What's the difference between this person, the psychiatrist, and everyone else on the list? Anyone like to give me their opinion on that?
I think psychiatrist is a person who is allowed to give medication, prescribe medication, and I guess all others can't do that.
Yeah, the mental health psychiatric nurse may administer the medication that the doctor has prescribed. Yeah, sure, but exactly. They can't prescribe it themselves. Yes, you're absolutely right. And also, people often get confused between psychologist and psychiatrist. Even people are well educated, so don't feel you're the only one if you didn't know. A psychologist is someone who has studied psychology, academic psychology, and then probably goes on to specialize in postgrad training or qualifications, clinical, educational, health, organizational, etc. But a psychiatrist, the main difference is, as you said, they can prescribe. Why is it that they're allowed to prescribe that makes them different from everyone on this list here?
Because they're medical doctors.
Yeah, exactly. Because a psychiatrist is someone who's a medical doctor, an MD, and so they can prescribe medication. And that's why, by the way, lots and lots of the psychotropic medications that people get, that's a generic term for anything that people get given for a mental health condition, can be prescribed by a doctor who is simply a GP. So you don't actually have to become a consultant to become a psychiatrist in order to prescribe medication. But a psychiatrist has to be an MD in order to prescribe medication. And one of the things that many people I find don't know, they assume that a psychiatrist is a doctor, but who's also trained in psychotherapy and various different kinds of therapy. And the answer is no, they don't. If they happen to have gone to a med school which does some of that, they will have done some of that. If not, then they don't. The typical MD training involves a small amount of psychology, which is basically how to handle difficult patients. So where do psychiatrists learn their trade? Where do they get their information from? How do they come up with the things they diagnose? Does anyone know? Do they do probes? Do they take blood tests? Do they do brain scans? Do they do stuff like that in order to prescribe medication? Even if they're a psychiatrist, not just a GP, a medical doctor. So how do they get their information that decides that you've got one of the 400 plus conditions that are now supposedly things that we've got as mental health conditions? Anyone know how they do that? Do they do experiments?
Well, they learn how to kind of take up certain amounts of criteria based on like the DSM or ICD.
Now, for those of you, Shalana's obviously knows her stuff because she's working in the field, so we'd expect her to. So when she refers to the DSM, that's something called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. There are various different names for it in different countries, but essentially it's much the same thing, which is a book, which is a manual, which is actually published every few years. It's updated. And how do you think the 400 plus conditions that are in there? It started out, by the way, at the beginning of the 20th century with something like 6 maximum. There were about 3 or 4 conditions, and they kind of extended it to 6. And now we have got over 400 labels in there that you could be diagnosed with. How do you think they get in there? Do you think they get in there by experiments, by by lots of research and science-based information, etc.? Anyone?
Research.
Yes, research, okay. Research maybe what, in a lab with animals or with people or what?
With people over the years, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what you'd like to think maybe, but I can recommend you, our students, by the way, on our longer courses, training to become psychotherapists, have to read this book as part of their training. There are many books on this topic, but the one they have to read as their course textbook is called Cracked: Why Psychiatry is Doing More Harm Than Good. Because It's full of all sorts of really interesting, very well-researched information, including interviewing people, the chair of the DSM panel who puts that manual together, who, by the way, has described the DSM as BS. I won't swear for those of you who are sensitive, but I think you probably know what that stands for. He actually uses the word. It comes in there because now we're a democracy. In some countries we have democracy. So what do we do in democracy when we want to support something?
Vote.
So they're voted in. So those 400 and something conditions are in there because gatherings of psychiatrists and clinical psychologists get together at annual conferences, and then they have a panel that gets together to look at the DSM, and every few years they bring out a new one. They nearly didn't bring out the last one because there's a lot of resistance now against this manual being the holy book for psychiatry. So they vote. Someone makes a case for something and they think it sounds reasonable, so they vote and it goes in. And occasionally they take something out because they think it doesn't sound so reasonable, or they think it's not appropriate anymore. For example, homosexuality used to be in there as a mental illness. And because there were strong lobbies of psychiatrists and psychologists who objected to that, eventually it got taken out, so it's not in there. And some sometimes change their names. There was a condition, a mental illness called manic depression. Well, that's now called bipolar, and there's bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. But this whole list of things actually has got virtually no science whatsoever behind it. When they talk about brain chemistry, needing to take drugs to adjust your brain chemistry changes all the time depending on how you're feeling, what you're thinking. And why am I going on about this? Because this is very relevant to CBT. CBT is based on the notion that by actually addressing your thoughts, your feelings, that also affects your behavior. And there is a dynamic loop between what you think and feel and what you do that changes all the time. And you can form patterns, you can form habits, and you can also change them. So this is very different from the idea that people have got this, somehow this disease that they've caught. And so when we talk about client-centered psychotherapy, solution-focused therapy, we're not talking about giving people drugs. Sometimes they get medication in combination, or they get it as a temporary fix if they're totally stressed out and need sedating in some way. But there is a problem because many of these things actually make things worse. So again, that's a topic for a whole other webinar. I won't get into that now. So all of these people may help in various ways, but all of them can incorporate CBT into their work. Now, for those of you who don't have a background, and a few of you said you're complete newbies, I have a slide that hopefully will be helpful to you. And even those who have got some experience might find it a useful way to think about things. Psychology basically thinks about people and human beings and human behavior in a number of different ways, which we could cluster together. So the first lot, which was the first lot that actually developed when psychology was born as a discipline, which was basically at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. And all the early psychologists, which we now would call psychologists or psychiatrists, actually were doctors, mostly medical doctors initially, and neurologists. Freud, you've probably all heard of Freud, and he's often known as the original psychiatrist. Actually, he was a neurologist. Might surprise some of you to know. Well, I'll ask you actually to see, because some of you might know. What was the first psychological discipline that's been around for probably as long as humans have, but it's been given its name for the last couple of hundred years, and which Freud was the first psychotherapeutic approach that Freud learned, went and studied and learned and then used. Anyone know what it was? Stunned silence.
Psychoanalysis?
No, he developed psychoanalysis, but what was the first thing that he learned that people were starting to use at a time? Remember, in the 19th century, if you had mental health problems, if you displayed behavior that didn't fit in, you would be put into a mental asylum, an institution, a lunatic asylum, and probably, pretty much the keys were thrown away unless you were rich enough to be able to have private care or get out of there eventually. But it was considered that once you had this, you were done for life. and the conditions were pretty primitive. You may have seen movies about it, people being given cold baths, treated horribly, then introducing shock treatment, which is still around, etc. Anyone know what the actual therapeutic method was that he first learned? And by his own admission, he wasn't very good at it. But he learned it from French, other neurologists who were French, and he went and studied with them at a quite famous hospital that specialized in people with mental health difficulties.
Was it hypnosis?
Yes, hypnotherapy. So this thing that you might have thought of, people might say was a fringe discipline or is out there. One of the major British counselling associations doesn't even recognise it as a form of psychological therapy, which I think is a real cheek, because it was the first approach. Yes, you're quite right, using hypnosis in a therapeutic way, which is what we call hypnotherapy. Now, Freud and his colleagues, I put in a couple to balance it out for each of them, but that one is one of the few females around at the time, Melanie Klein. What they thought when they looked at people was there's something wrong. So this is what we would call deficit psychology. Basically, people who get mental health problems, people who get mentally ill, there is something wrong with them, they're sick, so we need to fix them. So that is still very prevalent in many ways, in many approaches, but it moved on. So the next one I want to look at is there's something going on, okay? What we would call behavioral psychology, observing animals initially, as well as people, and looking to see what actually causes people and animals initially to behave in certain ways. And in the beginning with this guy here, I'll mention him later, Pavlov. Anyone remember what his experiments were on? You've probably heard about it, it's quite famous. What did Pavlov do his experiments on?
It was about the dogs and the saliva.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he would have dogs hanging in these sort of slings with bowls underneath, and they'd come in and they'd feed the dogs and they'd ring a bell when the food was about to be given out. And so the dogs learn to associate the bell with being fed. And, you know, when you're about to eat, humans do it too, but they tend not to dribble as much as dogs. Then we produce saliva, right? Because we need that to help us digest the food. So the dogs, when they heard the bell, would start producing saliva. So after he'd set up this, what he called a conditioned response, then the dogs began to associate that to the point where he'd come in, they'd ring the bell, and the dogs would produce saliva even though there was no food being produced. So this is what we refer to as a conditioned response. Someone makes an association between something and something else, and they behave as if that was happening. And he was followed on by this guy Skinner. Again, I'll mention the two of them a bit later as well. And Skinner actually researched as well. He started looking at people and human behavior as well as animals. So you could say, well, it's useful because this has data behind it, right? This is actually observing things. So there is a level of experimentation. Freud, no. It's case studies, it's theories, but we actually have no real research data from the deficit psychology model of Freud. So we move on now, and this was going on throughout the 20th century, a different approach. There's something right. This, by the way, this Maslow, you might have come across his pyramid of needs. It's used often in psychology and in business models and development and leadership models and so on. This is the idea that people have needs. And at the bottom there, you've got survival needs. Obviously, you need to eat and you need to reproduce to keep the species going, etc. So you've got your basic survival needs. And then it starts moving up to needs for safety, for needs for belonging, for the social needs I was talking about before, right up to the point where what he regarded as being the top of the pyramid is the need for what he called self-actualization, that humans particularly, rather than, I'm not ruling out all animals, but certainly most animals, it's about survival. Whereas for humans, it's more than that. It's something else, some sense of fulfillment, some sense of what Jung earlier actually referred to as individuation, the idea that each person has got special qualities, talents, skills, ambitions, what Virginia Satir referred to as yearnings, as longings, as dreams. So actually people have something more that they want. And the great thing about Maslow is the first person in psychology to say, why are we always studying people who are sick, who are broken, who've got something wrong with them? Why do we put animals in labs and sometimes with people, observe them and do things to them to see how they react? why don't we look at what they do that works? Why don't we study well people who are doing well, and learn from that? And this was what we refer to as humanistic psychology, sometimes called the psychology of being. And then for the last 20 years or so, we've now got a movement that's referred to, I said on the very first slide, applied positive psychology. This is now becoming called positive psychology, and it is a new academic discipline as well. And what it does is it says, look, there's something right with people, and there's also something better. People could actually achieve more. They could actually do even better than they are right now. So what you're seeing here, you've got Martin Seligman and his colleague, you'll see on the next slide also. I'll go on to the next slide now. You can actually see a YouTube video on how to pronounce this name. I can do it reasonably well, which is Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi. Great name, isn't it? But let's call him Mikhail and Martin Seligman. Basically, they produced, Martin Seligman had just been elected as the chair and the head of the American Psychological Association. And he'd done his fair share of experiments and all the rest of it. But he and some others got together and they produced a manifesto, which they called a manifesto for positive psychology. And as you can see, they talked about that positive psychology would achieve a combination of scientific understanding and effective interventions so that we could build thriving individuals, families and communities. And they produced that in 1998. So it's only just over 20 years old as an academic discipline, but now already we're into about the third wave of things that are being discovered and found. And so this basically, positive psychology brings together all the strands that you saw before, except for the first one. It looks at observing people, doing empirical studies, doing data, doing research, but also looking at what people's capabilities are and how we can stretch ourselves and do even better. So I make no apologies for the fact that the CBT that I teach is under the banner of positive psychology. So where did this all start? Well, actually, interestingly, right back to Greco-Roman and Eastern philosophies, because the approach to reasoning that we use in CBT was actually based on Socrates' inductive approach. And again, I don't know if any of you, I didn't ask earlier if any of you have done any NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, but in NLP, we talk about chunking down. Instead of looking at the generalizations about life and about ourselves and so on, but we go to the specifics. And that's what Socratic questioning does. So instead of saying, oh, I'm rubbish and I'm no good at maths, or I just don't find it easy to communicate with other people, we go to the specifics. What specifically is it you find difficult about maths? Can you do adding? Can you do subtracting? Is it algebra you find difficult when it gets abstract, etc.? Is it mental arithmetic? Do you find it's okay if you write it down? When you say you don't relate well to other people, does that mean in groups, in parties, or are you okay one-on-one with your friends? So we go from the specific to the general. So we find out specifically what the issue is, and then we go to, okay, how have you generalized that and how is that useful? There's also something called Stoic philosophy, which goes back to the Greek times as well. And this is the idea of resilience and what we nowadays are calling mental toughness. This word resilience you'll find is coming back in. And it doesn't mean repression. It doesn't mean pretend everything's all okay, but it means developing better coping strategies. Actually learning to tell the difference between catastrophe and something that's just a bit irritating. So what CBT has done is to take some of these old philosophical ideas and combine them with mindfulness meditation in the here and now, and an increased and enhanced understanding of the human psyche that, as I said, doesn't mean you have to do a psychology degree to get the principles of this. And the latest versions of CBT, I'll just mention now, are actually called things like mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, based on a guy called John Kabat-Zinn, who's an American, who's very well known in the field of mindfulness, taking Buddhist mindfulness techniques and actually incorporating them into stress reduction programs and understanding emotions. And the most recent version of CBT is something called dialectical behavioral therapy. This lady, psychologist Marsha Lynham, developed CBT techniques with distress tolerance, acceptance, and mindful awareness. So similar to this, it uses meditation techniques, but the difference between her version of CBT and some others, why she calls it DBT, is rather than focusing only on change, because CBT puts a big emphasis on change, changing yourself for the better, changing your thoughts, changing your feelings, changing your behaviors. She also puts an emphasis on acceptance of yourself as you are so that you can then move forward. And there are other strands. Some of you may have heard of things like ACT, acceptance, commitment therapy. The idea that, you know, in order to act, in order to move forward and change, you also need to accept yourself as who you are and boost your sense of confidence and self-esteem in yourself. And she developed this approach because she found she was working a lot with clients with so-called borderline personality disorder or bipolar states, more extreme forms of mental distress. And she found that they weren't able to change as quickly, or they found it actually quite stressful to change very quickly, which CBT focuses on fast change. And so she introduced this element of accepting yourself as you are, and change and acceptance go hand in hand. I want to say a bit about the Buddhist thing, because many people have Buddhas around, and it doesn't mean that they're necessarily Buddhists, but just to point out that this principle in Buddhism, particularly Mahayana Buddhism, sometimes known as Tibetan Buddhism, comes from this concept, which it's always interesting to have a quote, because as far as I know, everything that the Buddha is supposed to have said has been written down by his followers, that he wasn't someone like many masters who actually sat and wrote the scriptures. They were written by their followers and the people who studied with them. So we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts, and with our thoughts we make the world. So you can see there's a lot of that in common with the idea of the kind of therapy that gets us to look at understanding what our thoughts are and whether our thoughts are actually helpful, whether they help us to generate the sorts of results we want or not. And I want to say and point out, for those of you who weren't already aware, that although it's called one of the 5 major world religions, the reality is that Buddhism is not actually a religion, because it doesn't have the concept of a supreme deity. Buddhism is actually a system of philosophy and psychology, and therefore you can practice mindfulness and meditation techniques from Buddhism without having any religious belief or any conflict between that and being, say, a Muslim or a Christian or a Druze or a Zoroastrian or anything else at all. You can belong to any religion, have any faith system you want to, but the practice of meditation, the practice of self-reflection is something that you can do as an atheist or religious person without any conflict. So I just wanted to point that out in case people think, oh, this is some kind of advert for Buddhism. No, it's about using techniques that involve reflecting on your conscious thought processes, noticing your feelings, noticing how you respond to situations, and most of all, being in the moment, in the here and now, rather than constantly living by rerunning the past and watching old films of the past, or projecting into the future and watching movies of things that haven't actually happened yet. So I mentioned before, so I won't spend too long on the slide. Some of you mentioned the dog. I just wanted to introduce you to the pigeons. You heard from one of you said, yeah, Pavlov and the dogs. And there's just a little cartoon there about that. And the pigeons is because Skinner studied pigeons. And he came up with, rather than conditioned reflex, what he called operant conditioning. So he had an approach of radical atheism. He believed in data-driven approaches, but I find personally Skinner a bit scary. And if I tell you, some of the people who were great fans of Skinner were Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, many people involved in psyops, and some of the techniques that are being used in the last couple of years on a scale never before known to my knowledge, because they can use social media and so on to do this, is that we're being programmed in a way that, as I said, I don't think it's ever happened before, or not on this scale in human history. Even at the words that are being used, the imagery being used, if you didn't know that you were being brainwashed, well, we all are all the time by adverts and all the rest of it, but this is quite serious. It's being done quite deliberately. And the thing is that Skinner knew this, and so he was very keen on finding ways to get compliance. And if you've heard about, I'm not going to go in this seminar into it, but in this webinar into it, but some of the things being done by people like Milgram in the 50s and 60s, and that they've been repeating now, are to see how you can get people to comply with authority, even though what they're being asked to do goes against their values, their core values, their beliefs. And if you do it with an authority figure and you repeat it enough, people will do things that they would never have done otherwise. And sadly, about 67%, just under 70% of people will do almost anything they're told by an authority figure. So this has got clear implications for the last couple of years of what we've all been going through. And as I said, I'm not going to go into the detail on that, but just to think about how when people get messed around psychologically, this becomes something that's very confusing and they get very upset, and therefore they start to have a lot of mental health problems. We've got a few other people, but I'll just mention Wolper, systematic desensitization, unlearning fear, and assertiveness training. This is where we start to get people taking behavioral psychology and saying, you know what, rather than it being an experiment of doing things to animals or people as lab rats, as guinea pigs, why don't we take some of those techniques and apply them to ourselves? And that's what assertiveness, any who's ever done any assertiveness training, confidence boosting, a lot of the psychological self-help techniques around nowadays actually take some of these behavioral techniques and apply them. Excuse me, I'm just getting a brought to me. Great, thank you. So it's starting now to happen from the 50s and getting more so in recent years, but people are looking at how can we use these techniques to actually help ourselves. And again, this is very relevant to CBT. So to get to the nitty-gritty of the CBT comes out of the work of these two guys, Ellis and Beck. Now, Ellis was a psychologist who was a radical humanist. He believed in the best in people, and he was looking for ways to help people to get well. And what he found is that being a psychologist, he wanted more techniques and tools, so he trained as a psychoanalyst, a la Freudian style psychoanalytic therapy. And what he found was it didn't actually help people to get better. And so he started developing what he called an active and directive form of therapy. Well, you can see I've underlined it. The therapist's job is to help the client to understand that their core irrational beliefs lead to emotional pain, what he called catastrophizing. So for example, I'm going to be late for this meeting, or I lost my keys. Oh my God, it's a disaster. Everything's going to go wrong now. Oh, life sucks, right? A massive exaggeration, turning something into a catastrophe that isn't. Now, an earthquake, and you're in the middle of the earthquake zone, that's a catastrophe. Being on a ship that's sinking, that's a catastrophe. But the day-to-day things that bug us, that trigger our stress response, mostly are not catastrophic. But he pointed out that if we understand how we get triggered, activating events, we start to develop beliefs about why these happen and about how we are and about life and the consequences of this. And this is how we start to build our self-image. So he developed techniques for getting people, his clients, to actually start being active in the process of questioning their thoughts and their feelings and their behaviors and seeing how they could change them without going through long analytic therapy about your childhood and the past and spending 10 years on the couch remembering everything bad that your parents ever did to you. Beck was a psychiatrist. They didn't work together, by the way. They didn't even meet until you'll see on the next slide, much later on in their lives. But what's interesting is they both came up with very, very similar ideas and concepts as a result of their practical desire to help people. Now, Beck also, like Ellis, went and trained in psychotherapy. Again, he studied psychoanalytic therapy, and he found that it wasn't good enough. It didn't help his clients to get better, and he worked particularly with depressed people. So what he did was started to do what he called cognitive processing, which was to teach clients to start identifying and changing their negative thought patterns, and he called his system cognitive therapy. He also, being a psychiatrist, developed a number of what we call psychometric instruments, that's things like questionnaires and so on, to identify to what degree people are depressed, how seriously are they depressed. And he also worked, again, being a psychiatrist, with people with more extreme forms of mental disturbance like schizophrenia. So two individuals working independently, not knowing anything about each other until really towards late in their lives. And eventually they did get together, and there we go. They actually met, and they had what they called an audience, and they had the two of them on stage to talk to each other about their ideas. And what they found was that they had a huge amount in common, and they were using very similar, in some cases, absolutely identical techniques, structured, directive, intervention, where the client and the therapist work together to actually identify what is referred to as in CBT as this cognitive triad. Identifying what thoughts you're thinking, noticing them, making a note of them, noticing what they are and how they affect how we feel and what we do. And emotions, how we feel, and how we feel affects what we think and what we do, and our behavior, what we do and how that affects and feeds back into what we think and feel. So this dynamic triad of thoughts, feelings and behavior, which is known, as I said, as the cognitive triad. So the common features of CBT, which is basically a blend of the ideas of Ellis and Beck, the common features are a focus on the here and now, the present moment, hence the Buddhist mindfulness meditation techniques. But the therapist has a directive and guidance role. They don't just sit there going, and repeating back the last phrase that the person used, but actually getting them to reflect, not giving them the solutions ready-made, but prompting them, prodding them, guiding them to reflect on what they're thinking and feeling, how realistic it is, whether it's actually helpful to them, and thus enabling the person to start feeling more aware, being more aware of their thoughts, their feelings and their behaviors, how vulnerable they are, how easily they get triggered, what it is that triggers them. In other words, helping them to understand themselves. And if I summarize it, basically, the basic premise of CBT is to help people to eventually become their own therapists, to become their own guides, their own counselors. So cognitive behavioral therapy is simply the study of and the practice of everything that goes on in the mind. And cognitive doesn't just talk about cognitive as thoughts, but it incorporates the emotions, the feelings, where we put our attention, the behavior, everything we say, how we act, and also how we avoid action, and how we solve problems. And of course, therapy is a systematic approach to helping people to deal systematically with a problem, an illness, or a regular condition. And the basic concept, if you had to boil it down to what's it all about, CBT, so even out and then one says to you, what's CBT? What did you learn from that webinar? CBT says we tend to feel the way that we think and we act accordingly. And if you were to go into the psychoneuroimmunology and going into all the biological aspects of it, that's why when I said earlier, our brain chemistry changes all the time, because if I got you now to start thinking about the person you love most, the person you dislike most, of your favorite food, or sucking a lemon, or all sorts of things, just thinking about them will actually produce different states. And the great thing about CBT, and as I said, it's got a lot in common with NLP from this point of view, is getting you to understand that you can change your state by changing what you focus your thoughts and your feelings on. You don't have some little person inside of you telling you. Those voices inside of you are voices that you have control over. And this is why, believe it or not, but there's been a lot of research on this, Beck has found that even with people with extreme conditions labeled as schizophrenic have been able to make huge progress and in some cases get a cure, which inverted commas, because that's something we rarely use the term cure when we're talking about mental and emotional health difficulties. I want to say briefly something about motivation to learn. And again, this is where CBT varies from a lot of other systems. We've got two kinds of motivation, right? Extrinsic. Where does extrinsic come from? Where do we get extrinsic motivation from?
From outsiders, like from the environment, from other people. And the intrinsic is from within ourselves. It's like self-motivation.
Absolutely. And this is a key difference, because CBT does not focus on extrinsic motivation, but on intrinsic. Now you can see operant conditioning, the early days of behaviorism is all about getting people to respond, to buy your product, your Coca-Cola, to accept the statistics or accept the policies or procedures that we've had to deal with the last couple of years, with U-turn after U-turn, with countries with some of the best statistics not following what others are doing, with populations that are almost entirely vaccinated having some of the highest rates of transmission. I mean, logic violation. And as I said, anyone wants to challenge on this, I'm very happy to talk about that later. But I don't want to get into a whole rant about the pandemic, as I call it. But because you'll be dealing with people, if you're a therapist or you're talking to people or you're just a regular person who's interested in these things, is where are we getting our current conditioning from? It's from outside, right? And how is it triggering the inside? And this is, you quite rightly said, thank you for that. This is to do with our own internal motivation, which is our thoughts, our feelings, and our conation. I found that most people know what cognition is and affect is, but not necessarily. Conation means how you act on your thoughts and feelings. Now, there are some things that come outside of thoughts and feelings. I'll be the first to say, I know that we've got biology, we've got a certain amount of genetic material we don't really know, but certainly people don't just come in completely blank slate. As far as conditioning goes, they do, but I personally think we've all got our own individual selves that we bring in with us. And having had 3 kids and 2 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren, I'm pretty sure they all come in as individuals with their own path, like watching a flower grow from a seed, and all the seeds look pretty much the same, and the flowers have things in common, but each one is slightly different, just like our fingerprints. So that, okay, biology, and most psychologists will say biology maybe accounts for about 20%, but about 80% comes from the conditioning. And spiritual, where you're getting into a whole other dimension of transpersonal. And again, I'm all for this kind of, transpersonal reflection, spirituality, but it doesn't come under the field of psychology, except in transpersonal psychology, which you can only do a certain amount of research on. Good on to people like Dr. Joe. I don't know how many of you have heard of Dr. Joe Dispenza, but there are people who are doing a lot of really good empirical research, taking DNA, blood tests, electromagnetic frequency readings in the room, urine samples, stool samples, and then comparing before and after when people have done meditation practices and practiced transpersonal techniques, and also doing things like breath work. So I'm all for that, but we have very little research on this. And again, if you're interested in this side of things, people like Anita Moorjani, people who've had out-of-body experiences, death experiences, this is an interesting field, but there's very little sound, solid research evidence on it so far. So, I meant to say, so this is one of the things that's a bit interesting to study and risky, and something to look at carefully is now, when we get people coming and really pushing other people to say, get jabbed, do this, that, and the other, and people go, yeah, that's because social cognition is something that comes from the inside and the outside. So we want approval. Remember I said on that pyramid of needs, we want people to love us and accept us and have us to be part of the the bubble, the support network and everything. And we're also getting encouraged from outside to do it. The difference between intrinsic and extrinsic is that extrinsic revolves around carrots and sticks, so basically reward and punishment. So if you don't wear your face mask, you'll get fined, or you won't be allowed in. In some places, some countries taking it to the extreme. I was reading this recently. One of the, I think it's in Canada, you can't go into a store to buy other than food or medicines without a health monitor coming with you. You're not allowed to buy anything else. That is extreme of the stick, right? The carrot, well, you'll get rewards. And in some cases, we've probably laughed about this, similar things you probably laughed about as me. Oh, you'll get a donut, or you'll get a free McDonald's if you get a jab. Oh, great, this is a health promotion campaign and we're going to give you reward of junk food for looking after your health. Bit crazy, eh? Some places they've actually given you a lottery ticket, etc. So carrots and sticks. This is providing your own motivation. This is you giving yourself your own encouragement, your own self-talk. And this is obviously where CBT wants you to be, because that's what creates lasting change. If you have change that's pushed from the outside, as soon as you take away the punishment, people will stop doing it. Anyone who knows anything about Eastern Europe, and when communism came in and they did away with all the churches and religion, and China got rid of the monasteries in Tibet and so on. As soon as they took off the restrictions, people went back to worshipping again and having their religious and spiritual faith and belief. So this has to come from the inside. So in CBT, just a little bit of jargon, we represent our experience of life into self-schema. You might call that my own self-image of myself, the way I think about myself. And this is based on our experience and how we interpret that. And we tend to hold those schema about ourselves based on the things we've got well-developed concepts about. So someone might think, I'm a friendly person, a people person. Someone else might think, I don't trust others and I'm shy. Now in CBT, we don't say these concepts are simplistically positive or negative in themselves. It's a matter of whether they're functional or dysfunctional for us in terms of achieving our goals or being self-empowered. So for example, you might be a people person who's friendly, and you might take that to the extent which is actually negative, because you're always being asked to do things and doing what other people ask of you and going along with the crowd to the point where you get exhausted, taken advantage of, becoming a doormat, or feeling resentful. You might be someone who's been once bitten, twice shy. You may have been ripped off. You may have been abused emotionally or even physically. So you might have had very good reasons for not being a people person, to keeping to yourself, to being shy, to being reserved. So CBT doesn't judge these things as bad or good. It says, how does it work for you? Is it getting you the results you want? So if the answer is yes, great. If it's not, then let's start to look at that. So we develop as individuals packages of self-knowledge, and the trouble is then we tend to then label ourselves and generalize, that's how I am, and believe that we can't change, when actually we can. It just takes a little bit of practice and rehearsal. Now, I mentioned anxiety and depression, and that's where a lot of research in CBT has been done on a number of things, but particularly depression and anxiety. And what Beck found is that there's a very strong correlation between a negative view of the situation you're in, yourself as a person, and of the future. And particularly what Beck found is that if you've got a negative view of yourself and a negative view of the future, then that is very, very strongly implicated in depression. Now, again, if you look at that and what I've been saying until now about this last couple of years and some of the people who are going through this mental health crisis, the situation continually presented as negative. Not just that you're a person who's a bit negative and pessimistic, but you keep being fed this from the outside. Negative view of the self. So if you already had low self-esteem, not much confidence, then that's going to really add to the mix. And you're not going to be looking at your skills and your strengths. You're going to keep reinforcing that negative spiral of, oh yes, see there, I can't do it. And the negative view of the future, again, this is being very much fed by, oh, it'll be the next pandemic and then the next one and this variant and this is how it's all going to be. So at the moment, regardless of even being a positive person, you might well find that you're becoming very depressed and very anxious because of all this external negativity. So anyone got anything to say about how this might be relevant to the huge increase in mental health problems over the past 2 years of lockdown and the ongoing measures and restrictions? Anyone wants to chip in, feel free to make a comment. Otherwise, I'll let you have a think about that and take that away with you to reflect on.
Definitely, in terms of the negative view of the future, specifically like that type of not knowing, confusion about what the future will hold, negative view of, this has been prolonged for a pretty long time. Just having that, confusion about the future could definitely contribute to that. And also even negative view of self. If you had already possibly had some probably low self-esteem, because some people will judge you or not have friends or whatever, less in socialization or being forced to be isolated and that kind of thing, could further perpetuate depression or could lead to it.
Yeah, and the thing is that if you think about the specifics, who's going to suffer, who has been suffering and is likely to be suffering and is showing up in the statistics about the situation in the future, particularly, I mentioned kids, right? They've missed out on huge chunks of the last 2 years schooling, of interaction with others. Surprise, surprise, we have big waves of infections of all sorts of things when kids go back to school. Why? Because they're used to having herd immunity from mixing with other kids. Anyone in education, and I briefly many years ago taught in junior primary education, You know, you talk about having half-term flu as a teacher because you're exposed to all sorts of bugs, and you go away and you keep going, and then you have half-term or the holidays, and you finally go, oh, and you collapse and allow yourself to rest. You're exposed to all sorts of bugs and germs and viruses and things when you're in a crowd situation. When you take kids out of that and everyone just mixes together, then you put them back together, suddenly everyone gets sick. So those kids start to develop a fear of being around others. They have a fear about, I was watching something that nearly made me cry from a young woman saying, my exams have been cancelled twice and I don't know now if I'll be able to go to university. If I do, will it all just be university online? Someone else saying, I don't want to get vaccinated. They're experimental. I don't want the vaccine, but I'm being told I can't go on campus or go to university. So for children, people who've lost their jobs or their businesses have gone down. So again, I'm not going to go into the detail because of reasons of time, but I want you to go away and have a think about how the mental health problems that people have been going through as a result of the lockdown and the measures that we've been going through are contributing to mental health difficulties, and how the importance of developing a positive view of the self, of looking for the positives in the situation and not accepting that the future is just going to be bleak and gloomy, but looking for that light at the end of the tunnel. That's what makes people get better and gives people motivation to get well. All the people I meet, by the way, who tell me they've quite enjoyed the last couple of years are the ones who use that time to actually develop skills, make the most of the situation that they can't control that's outside of them, research, etc. And Dr. David Cato, who actually is the one who run the courses under licenses, I was in touch with him recently, and he told me he's actually learned to the point where he can now follow about, I think he said about 3/4 of the language he's been teaching himself. Is it Swedish or Danish? Anyway, Scandinavian language. He's focused on doing that during this last couple of years. So the purpose of CBT is to identify what thoughts you're having, what beliefs you've got by self-monitoring, and then educating yourself to raise your self-awareness and understand the relationships between your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And it's quite a challenge. And that's why I've said a few things that you might think, gosh, he said those things publicly. We don't usually talk about these things publicly. The reason I've done that is because I have clients who tell me, I'm going nuts. Either I'm going nuts or there's something nuts, because they're telling us one thing, then they're telling us another. It's a logic, it just doesn't fit, it's not logical, but it must be that something wrong with me. And my job is to say to them, actually, your logic is being violated, because I'm run by logic and reason in terms of facts. And I've done enough research and fact checking to know that actually there's a huge amount that's going on behind the presented surface of the situation we've been in the last couple of years, which is not the way that it's been presented. So I don't mind seeing that, because I can give chapter and verse, I can refer to the research, I can refer to Nobel-winning prize winners in epidemiology, in infections, doctors, nurses, etc. So I will quite happily say that. And if I get deplatformed, so I get deplatformed, but I'm not going to sell out on a lifetime of being committed to human development and truth and positivity and holistic well-being because of fear and anxiety. Just not going to do it. So CBT encourages our clients to actually change those dysfunctional automatic thoughts that just kick in and check them out, do reality checks, to actually notice emotional states. Do they vary at different times of day, different times of year? What are the triggers? Are there certain situations, certain people that trigger? And CBT is very practical. So people are encouraged to fill in forms or keep journals, to try out different behaviors. So the client just doesn't come away and come back week after week and tell you the same old story. No, they go out, they do stuff, they come back, and then you check together what worked, what didn't work, what might you do differently. So it's an interactive educational process. So let's just briefly look at the thought process that causes the feeling process and affects our actions or the lack of action. See, if someone keeps telling themselves, I'll never have a good job, that's the thought, right? The feeling, they start to feel hopeless. So what action do they take if they've been telling themselves that? Anyone like to say what action they're going to take if they keep thinking and feeling this way?
They will manifest their thoughts.
So what do they
attract that to their lives?
Yeah, what action do they take, if any, if they keep saying, I'll never have a good job and I feel hopeless?
They will not take any action.
Yeah, they probably
in
won't
the
even
split.
contact the headhunters. They won't look at the job ads. They won't register because they've already decided that they're never going to have a good job. So what's the point, right? So this one is lack of action, right? I'm not going to take an action because I've already decided I'm not going to succeed. How about this? Nobody likes me. That's the thought. So I feel lonely and rejected. So what do I actually do as a result of that?
Withdrawal.
Stop socializing.
Yeah, I stay in my room. I don't socialize. I turn down party invitations. I mix with just myself or my immediate people I know. And I've had clients, by the way, long before the pandemic coming to me, oh, you know, I'm never going to find a husband. I'm never going to get married. Okay, what's the matter with you? Oh, well, I'm bipolar. They told me I was schizophrenic when I was 18, but then they said when I was 19, I was bipolar, and now I'm on medication. And what do you do all day? Oh, I sit and watch the TV. And do you do anything else? Well, occasionally the TV gets boring. What do you do then? Oh, I said, do you watch movies in your mind? Yeah. What movies do you watch in your mind? She thought for a bit. She said, oh, well, there's the one where I'm a diabetic. Oh, okay. What do you do when you're a diabetic in that mind movie? Oh, well, I have to inject myself with insulin. Oh, okay, that's interesting. And so that's quite a dramatic movie. Do you have any other movies? Well, there's the one where I have to have my leg amputated. Oh, really? Okay. So is that connected with the other one? Yeah, because I'm diabetic. I get a problem, and so I have to have my leg amputated. And okay, so what could you do instead of going to that kind of a movie? If I tell you, using a combination with this particular client I'm mentioning now of CBT and hypnotherapy, within 4 sessions, I do long sessions. So the first one's 3 hours and the others were 2 hours each. So the equivalent of maybe, 5 to 10 sessions, max of 1 hour sessions. This lady was out and about. She actually was redecorating her room. She went to the hospital where her sister was having a baby, which she said she could never do before. And you know what her goal was? And again, having people having a goal on where they want to be, what they want to achieve, she wanted to mix with people so that she could get married and have a family of her own. So she kind of realized that it wasn't going to help her to get what she wanted by staying indoors, getting fat, watching TV all the time. If she wanted to get out there and meet men who might actually want to marry her. This was an Emirati lady, by the way. So within a few weeks, she'd actually changed her way of thinking and feeling. Her actions went along with it. I'm not saying it's always that fast, but it can be very, very rapid that you can get results with people if they have a motivation. Remember the motivation thing? She wanted a husband, she wanted a family, she wanted her life to change. And she'd had a gym membership that she'd bought a year ago, but she wasn't going to the gym. Well, that changed as well because she had a clear focus on what she wanted to achieve. So this is what CBT is about. It's about reality testing, about setting goals and working towards them. And in the first stage of CBT, it's about normalizing, and we use all sorts of behavioral techniques to get people back into a normal range. So they're not just focusing on being depressed. So that might mean breathing and focusing, the relaxation response, otherwise known as hypnosis, hypnotherapy, daily activity schedules, doing things, actually using the energy in your body to generate activity, and that gets your hormones going, it gets your endorphins going, it gives you a good feeling physically. That's why exercise is on all the self-help plans that are any good. Pleasure ratings. What things do I enjoy? What things don't I enjoy? Let's focus on doing more of what I enjoy and cutting out the things I don't. And experiments. Let's do experiments. Let you be the research project. Controlled exposure. Okay, I'm terrified of public speaking, but suppose I spoke to someone I was standing next to in a queue I didn't know and just had a chat to them about something. Starting to do things in a way that you can manage, bite-sized chunks, not throwing you in at the deep end if you're not ready for that, and reflection and review. And then the second stage is to change the program. As we know, about 95 to 99% of what we do is just what we built up. Routine, habits, behaviors that just run on autopilot. So now cognitive therapy actually gets you to step out of that automatic way of responding, start to challenge your negative automatic thoughts, identify and challenge them. Start to analyze your logic. Is it actually logical to say I'm bound to die and that plane's bound to crash if I get in it? Oh, I'm terrified of flying. No, actually flying is one of the safest forms of transport that there is. So, just looking for the logic in it. If it's logical to say, well, Sheikh Zayed Road's pretty dangerous, then sure, drive carefully on the Sheikh Zayed Road, or even get someone else to drive you if they're a better driver. So reality checking. Using the Socratic questioning, guided discovery to challenge and rewrite these thoughts in a more balanced and realistic way. And that usually takes, if you're just doing 1 hour sessions, not longer sessions like me, about 5 sessions to start doing that. So the client starts to question what's going on in their mind before they started feeling this way, starting to draw up a list of the main thinking errors that they do, reality testing these, and this is important, treating thoughts as if they're hypotheses rather than as facts. Check them out. That's the basis of good science. Good science isn't fixed forever. Once upon a time, scientists believed the earth was flat. Then they started noticing that it wasn't. They tortured a few scientists for daring to say that the earth wasn't at the center of the universe and that the sun was actually at the center of our solar system. And then eventually that became the new science orthodoxy. When they tell us now, follow the science, excuse me, scientists have got many different opinions. Debate, discussion, checking out the logic, that's the scientific method. And that's why I personally get so fed up with the whole way that the whole thing has been presented the last couple of years, is because instead of actually listening, debating, oh, I don't agree with you, fine. But instead, I'll tell you, you can't speak, you're not allowed. Oh, it's wrong speech, it's not right, you mustn't do this, you mustn't think that, or you'll be, etc. We're in a scary time. Anyone on this that can take away from this message, we need to think for ourselves critically and independently. I've done my job, if nothing else. So we can start to think about ways of thinking about things that are more realistic, more balanced, actually reflect the reality. And then for those who are going deeper, we can go into the unconscious, subconscious. We can use hypnotherapy and inner child work. We can use whatever methods we use, whatever modalities you've got that are effective, and combine those. And also personally, you can capture thoughts by making recordings using dictaphone, your mobile, etc. But I encourage people to write down through journaling, through filling in forms, etc. Because writing stimulates logic and reason. It stimulates a different part of the brain from the primitive amygdala, and thus more likely to think rationally, just knee-jerk responses of emotion. So just to wind this up on, wrap up on research, remember I mentioned research more than, it's probably well over that now, but last time I looked a few years ago at just how many clinical trials we'd had, Beck's methodology in particular, because Beck lived longer, by the way. Ellis died shortly after they met, so sadly they couldn't continue collaborating. Ellis was a bit older anyway, and he lived, I think, till 93. Beck just died last year, in fact. He only died a few months ago. He was 100 and still research active, and his daughter runs his institute. So it's been demonstrated in clinical trials to be more effective. A clinical trial is where you have one person having CBT, one person having something else, maybe drugs, maybe some other intervention, and then a group with nothing happening, a trial, a control group, and then you actually study over a period of time and see who gets better and how long they get better. And it's been found not only for anxiety and depression, but as I mentioned earlier, for much more serious things, much more things that impact on your life and people around you more, like personality disorders, schizophrenia, etc. So there's plenty of things that you can follow up on that. I've given you a reference there. I've missed out a W there for some reason. Anyway, it's www.academyofct.org. So a couple of things to finish up with. A Toronto in Canada study of cognitive therapy versus pharmacotherapy, in other words, medication, used pre and post-treatment brain scans. Now they found that both kinds of treatment changed the brain, but with the cognitive therapy, the changes were top down. In other words, they came from the thinking, from the rational and cognitive active part of the brain down and affected the lower part, the system that's what I referred to earlier as the reptilian, the primitive brain, the lizard brain, the emotional brain. So with the drugs, they just basically sat on the emotions, affected the amygdala. As soon as you take the drugs away, the same problems arise because somebody hasn't actually learned to understand themselves, their thoughts, their feelings. They haven't been educated. So antidepressants affect one part of the brain, while CBT affects another part. The antidepressants dampen the limbic system, emotions, whereas CBT calms the cortex, the center of reason. And perhaps more importantly, the pharmacotherapy is temporary, even if it does any good at all, which, you know, many would argue it makes things worse because it can actually make somebody more depressed, more anxious, and have all sorts of physical negative effects on the body if taken over a period of time. Brain lesions, I won't go into it, but lots and lots of things which are, again, a matter of record and lots of scientific studies on this. Much less likely to relapse with CT because you've learned coping skills, self-reflection, rehearse new behaviors. So Beck himself, who was very, very keen on evidence-based science, was very careful not to overstep the mark. But he said cognitive therapy does seem to be a cure sometimes, and that's for even things like, as I say, schizophrenia, personality disorders, and certainly very effective as a long-term solution for depression and anxiety. Once the clients learn these skills, they're very unlikely to relapse because they know how to change and they're likely to be able to maintain the change. So CBT enables people to become their own therapist, and people who are therapists, counselors and coaches, etc., can use their own techniques, incorporating them into CBT and other modalities. Very flexible, and I won't read this whole list out, but all sorts of things. The only thing I would say at the bottom of that list, eating disorders and OCD, personally, I think more training is required in that, and that's why we do an additional, a 2-day weekend intensive on OCD and eating disorders, because it tends to involve the same kinds of personality characteristics and ways of thinking and feeling that leads to these sorts of issues, eating disorders, bulimia, anorexia, binge eating, etc. We've seen a lot of that during this last couple of years, and also the OCD and germophobia, etc. So all of these things, whatever your modality is, if you are a therapist, if you work in the field, CBT can combine with these things. And this is a final slide on this. CBT, to summarize, is client-centered, active and directive. It's time limited, it's quite brief. If it's just done on its own, 15 to 20 sessions of 1 hour each, you can halve that or less when combined with other effective modalities. I found particularly hypnotherapy, it's very, very effective. It's structured, problem solving and solution focused. And the research that's been done so far shows that combining particularly hypnotherapy with CBT and also some somatic therapies, body work, breath work, massage, grounding, dance, TRE stands for trauma release exercises, EFT, if you haven't heard of emotional freedom techniques, meridian therapies, eye movement desensitizing and reprocessing, lots of different therapies that work well with CBT. But personally, if I had to only do one, I would say hypnotherapy was a very good, which is why I teach both, and bits of these others in the courses that I teach, but particularly hypnotherapy and CBT. So it's good to conduct further research, and you can see it's been reported in evidence-based mental health that adding hypnosis to cognitive behavioral therapy has been found to reduce acute stress disorders and anxieties. So my final slide, which is really, I won't read it all through, but for those who are in the field and are thinking of actually getting some training, and when I say in the field, that could be quite a broad definition, health, caring, counselling, educators have a pastoral role, teachers who do some tutorial support work, well-being coaches, people who work in the field of coaching, HR, perhaps who do mediation and have to break news to people and counsel them to some extent, all of those things. But if you're not sure and you want to talk to me about that, follow up with me as to eligibility. And also for those who are newbies but interested in getting into this field, we do a 2-year course. We used to do a 1 year and then another 1 year advanced, but now we've done away with all of that. With all this going on, it's slowed everything down. But as of next year, we're intending to restart our professional practitioner trainings, which are suitable for people who are already in the field but want more on integrative psychotherapy and counselling, including hypnotherapy, CBT, etc., and a whole bunch of other stuff there, as you can see. So we have people who are psychiatrists through to newbies, and it's suitable for mixed ability, and that's all online now. And also I don't take on many individual clients nowadays. I'm too busy with other things, but I do some individual therapy, and if I can't take it on, I refer to people that I've who are graduates of mine who I know are really good. So for those who are interested, there's that. You can always come back. Now my time is up. We've overrun by about 5 to 10 minutes. Sorry about that. A few of you came in sort of about 5 or 10 minutes. So I've covered the slides in the usual time, about an hour and a half. I'm just going to open up the chat room in case there's anything in there. Yeah, somebody has to leave, that's fine. I'm going to put my personal email address on here in case any of you want to consult with me about whether it's suitable for you to do the course or not, or any other questions you might have. So it's Dr Leila at transforminst.com, and at the moment, because I'm in Morocco, my WhatsApp number is, as I'm going to put it up again in the chat room. Okay. So that's my WhatsApp. I'm 3 hours behind the UAE, so I prefer to do WhatsApp by writing, or you can record a message. So if anyone wants to look at the chat room, if they want to know to contact me, if you're coming through Illuminations, obviously you can go through them, but if it's a personal question, they'll just refer you back to me anyway, so you might as well just contact me directly. So for now, as I said, anyone who needs to go now, that's absolutely fine. I hope you've not been completely on information overload. I've tried to keep it down to the basics and straightforward. If you want to know more, or if you're even thinking about a career in this field, if you go onto my personal website, I'll put that up too so you can have a look at it. There's actually a free 3-part course called Transform Your Career Prospects, which is, it's at my email address, it's transforminst.com. You can actually get that 3-part course free of charge if you're just thinking about it. And there's also a special, which is, I always have to stop about this because the idea that I'm selling the amount of stuff I do for $27 still shocks me. But there's a 6-part course where you can get all sorts of exercises, information, videos, worksheets, etc., on thinking about how you might actually develop, whether you'd be better off doing coaching, counseling and therapy, or whether you're better off staying in your day job, but maybe taking up other interests, etc. So you can get all of that from the website, either free or for a nominal price. If anyone's interested, they're welcome to do that. So for now, those who have to go, I'll say bye-bye. Thank you for joining me. For those who aren't in a rush or would like to maybe ask me some questions or challenge some of the provocative things that I've said, if you find them provocative, then I'm happy to stay on for a while longer to talk to you. So go ahead if anyone's got any questions or anything they'd like to share. Please take your time to do that now. We've still got a few of you there, so go ahead, have a chat. Sita's got to go.
Hi, Doctor. My name is Sarah, and thank you so much for this presentation. Actually, I was interested in this presentation as I tried before CBT for around 2 months, as a couple of sessions, and but I was wondering if actually it was having a great impact on my feelings and how to control over my feelings. And how to interact with this negative thoughts and feelings. But
okay, so are you saying that you did some CBT with a professional?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, and it brought up a lot of feelings for you. Is that what you're saying?
Sorry, come again?
I said, are you telling me that doing the CBT, your thoughts and the what you did in the CBT brought up a lot of feelings, but you didn't really continue to work through those feelings?
Yeah, I was committed to the decisions for around 2 months, but I found it eventually like it has like yes, I did a great job, and I was able to identify my feelings and my thoughts. But eventually, I went with the therapist. She was always sticking to a manual, and I find it difficult to stick always. I find sometimes when I do a mistake, I'm out of the manual. So in this one, I was confused. Like she was always trying to stick to the manual, and she was always trying to convince me that we cannot go out out of this manual. So I want to ask
well,
you.
I mean, without, obviously, I don't know, we were talking about, and I don't want to know, certainly part of our professional ethics is we don't publicly talk about other therapists unless we've got good things to say. But it sounds to me a bit like what I sometimes refer to as therapy by numbers. See, you can learn any kind of therapy by numbers, whether it be CBT or hypnotherapy or whatever. You have certain protocols, you follow them, you go A, B, C, D, and that's how you do it. That's not client-centered. Our approach, as I explained earlier, is client-centered. That means that every therapeutic tool that you have, whether it be CBT, hypnotherapy, or anything else, is a tool in your toolkit, and it informs your approach, and you might be a specialist in that, but you need to tailor your approach to your client and your individual client's needs. You know, this is a bit like the DSM I was talking about before. Oh, we'll tick all the boxes. Oh, then you've got bipolar. You've got bipolar 1 or 2. Hang on a minute. Who says so? And by the way, those categories, I didn't say this because I didn't want to take up too much time because it's a whole presentation in itself. But those, the solutions given in the diagnostic statistical manual are entirely provided by the pharmaceutical industry. And it's a question of looking through what have they got and then look at what drugs I prescribe. This is not good mental health. This is not holistic person or client-centered mental health. It's about getting to know that person, developing empathy, which you learn to do very rapidly if you're good at your job, and then looking at what the issues are, what the presenting issues are, what might be the underlying issues, but might not be the same thing, the underlying issues as the presenting issues, and then matching the modalities and the work that you do to the needs of that client. Now, some people are very, the clients are very different. I want CBT, I gather this is the best, fine. I'll come in with a CBT approach, and they might say, I don't want to have hypnotherapy, fine. But does that mean that I can't get them to close their eyes and imagine something and relax and focus on their breathing? Of course not. It doesn't matter what we call it. In a sense, the names are there as a, what can I say, as a kind of a template, you know, the kind of approach you take. But a good therapist has a number of things in their toolkit, you know, and if you're saying to me like, well, we're following a book, well, you could go out, you could buy, I get my students to buy if they want a good thing to refer to. There's, I'm looking at it now myself, I'm looking up. You've got depression for dummies. You've got cognitive behavioral for dummies, cognitive behavioral therapy workbook. You could go out and buy a book at a fraction of the price of a therapist and work through the book yourself if you want to buy a workbook. And for people who haven't got the money for therapy, I often recommend that. It's good. But a good therapist will work with you on whatever has come up as what's come up in the therapy. And by the way, you said for 2 months. 2 months would be about 8-9 sessions. That's if they're only using CBT, in my opinion, especially if it's only 1 hour sessions, that's not sufficient. CBT normally requires 15 to 20 sessions of 1 hour. If you're an eclectic therapist, an integrative therapist using a number of different approaches, and you're doing longer sessions, like I think I said, my face-to-face sessions was 3 hours for the first, and then 2 2-hour sessions minimum. But online, I do 2 hour sessions. So that would be 6 hours, 3 sessions would be the minimum. Usually I can get through what we need to do, unless it's some really major, serious, long-term issues. If it's someone presenting with some depression and anxiety, 3 sessions is sufficient, as long as they're doing their part of doing their self-help tasks in between. So we're talking about, you know, a month and a half, a couple of months. But for people who are doing it, as I said, perhaps more simplistically and so on, it's going to be, you're looking at least sort of 4 months. That's still very fast because, you know, Freudian therapy, you're looking at years. But CBT will generally be, as I said, in the range of 15 to 20 sessions, which would be sort of 3 to 4 months or so, 5 months at the most to get results. But the people that I train myself, who've done other things as well, you'll get results in a couple of months and big changes. But as I said, that requires the client to do their work. And for example, you mentioned feelings. If someone's got a lot of feelings coming to the surface, I might well start going towards more doing some hypnotherapy, some inner child work, some self-healing, you know. So those things might be required. But if you have to do it like almost like homework or schoolwork, you know, oh, we need to do this bit in this order. That's not how humans are made, right? Every single person has got their own story. They've got their own background. They've got their own issues. So if you try to fit the person to the therapy, you're never going to get really outstanding results. So as I said, I don't want to criticize anyone, but I'm just saying what I'm hearing from you indicates someone following a rather rigid schedule, which is not the same as as tailoring the therapy to the individual client. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, that really helps. Thanks for clarifying, because I felt always there is something wrong, as I was not comfortable with the end. So I was feeling that it starts really well, and then it didn't go well at the end. So that's why I wanted to ask you, as I feel something's going wrong.
Yeah, well, as long as you don't think there's something wrong with me. You know, one of the things that annoys me, if I look on forums and therapists, they're sharing forums or supporting each other, and I've even seen it in somebody's training manual, something like, if you're not getting results at the end, you've got a resistant client. And that made me so mad when I read it. No, it means you haven't yet found the way to help that client to help themselves. It might mean it's something about you. It might mean you haven't worked through those things yourself, and so it's really difficult for you to see those things in other people. A good therapist needs to really be, I don't think they have to be in therapy forever, but they have to have really worked on themselves and continue to work and learn, and to reflect on how could they have run a session better if it doesn't go so well, rather than blame the client. Now, you might have a client who says, I simply refuse to do this. You fix me. Come on, come on, doc. Tell me what to do. Then okay, I'll say to them, no, this is not about that. I could give you advice. I could tell you what to do, and it might sound really good advice, and it'll go in one ear and out the other, because back to that slide, in motivation, that's extrinsic. So if I tell you what to do, you're not doing the work, you're not engaging with it. But if someone is doing the work, they're actually doing the tasks, they're coming back, they're reflecting, they're sharing, they're saying, oh, I've noticed this, and they're working, great, then you work with them. And if you find you can't help them, then you either improve your own knowledge of whatever it is they're bringing to you, or you refer them to a colleague or someone who's more experienced and has better results in that particular field. I mean, for example, I've actually had very good results with OCD and eating disorders myself, but I don't particularly like working. I teach it because as I said, I've had good results, and I've helped other people to get very good results as therapists with it. But it's not an area, particularly OCD, that I particularly enjoy working with. I'll do it if I have to as a generalist, if there's no one else to refer to. If there's someone who loves working with that topic, I'll refer to them. So, I mean, I like working with childbirth. I like working with people who are really wanting to really change their lives and really transform and do it quickly. So I will tend to attract more of those sorts of clients. But if you work in an environment, as I did in Bahrain particularly, I was there for years, there was no one else to refer them to. And that's one of the reasons I started running training courses a lot, because I wanted to be able to know that when I left, there'd be people I could refer to. So do the due diligence, check out that person's background, ask if necessary to talk to, maybe if there's other clients willing to speak to you about their experience, or, just ask some questions. Don't just assume because someone's advertising or says they're a therapist, or they're good at what they do, or they've got testimonials on their website. Don't take that for granted, especially if it's just written testimonials. I know it's a problem, not everyone wants to give testimonials and identify themselves in therapy, fair enough, but at least get some sense, ask what professional association they're in, whether they're in supervision. So there are questions you can ask to make sure that you're doing your best to get a good fit. And then of course you can listen to your gut. I can tell pretty well within 15 to 20 minutes on the phone, which if I have an initial consultation on WhatsApp, or as it is nowadays, I can tell pretty well, and vast majority of people I'll be able to help. And there's occasionally I'll get red flag or warning bells, and I'll suggest that maybe they try someone else instead of me. You start to develop that, but that comes with experience over time. But again, I emphasize, if anyone ever tells you you can't be fixed, or you're not you're not able to do it, or you're resisting, or if you're using hypnotherapy, or you can't be hypnotized, if anyone tells you anything like that, then immediately that tells you more about them as a therapist than it does about you, okay? So don't take it personally. Find someone who can help you. If you need referral to someone locally, if you want to meet face-to-face, I can help with that, to pass you on. Because for myself, I'm only working online at the moment because of being based in Morocco. Otherwise, I would be doing face-to-face, but I wouldn't be doing it in a centre where I have to wear a mask or get jabbed or whatever to do that. So I'm more restricted in my availability than I was before. So yeah, never take it that there's something wrong with you. If therapy starts to stall or not go so well, take a break, have a change, you know, but reflect on what's happening and what's missing. And I'm really glad to hear that you did that, and that I'm glad you asked the question too, because it's given me the chance to make those points, because very often people say, oh, there must be something wrong with me, or I'm doing it wrong. No, it means that you've either not got a good fit, or there's something that needs to be worked on differently, coming at it from a different angle perhaps. And also, by the way, I should add, because again, my own training is such that I do think that there are different kinds of personalities, and therapy of different sorts suits different sorts of people. So people who are very logical and analytical and like to understand what's going on, CBT is great for them. They might also need some of the other stuff too to kind of loosen them up a bit. But people who are very, very kind of pleasers, they like everyone to like them, they don't have very high self-esteem, etc. They can often do with more things like hypnotherapy work. Yeah, bring in the CBT, but be quite gentle, boost their confidence, their self-esteem. Don't come from more a feeling perspective rather than from a logic and reasoning perspective first. Bring in the logic and reason by all means as you go through, but if they don't feel comfortable, if they feel you're judging them, if they feel you're analysing them and being too obvious about reading their body language, they're going to feel uncomfortable, like you've got them on a microscope. So these are all things that, again, a good therapist needs to be trained in how to do that. Unless you only want to do one particular kind of client or one particular kind of therapy, in which case, fine, but you're limiting the number of people you can help if you take that approach. That's why, as I said, for me, CBT is a topic in itself. We're very clear about what it is, but it's flexible, and I like to work with things that are flexible that you can combine with other things. If someone says, oh, this is the only sort of therapy that works, this is the only one that's any good, no. Just like, you know, in any other aspect of life, is there one way? Does one size fit all? Very, very rarely. So thank you for your question. I hope that's answered you sufficiently.
Yeah,
if anyone else has got any questions, please chip in.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the CBT diploma.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody from a nutrition background would be suitable for this?
Yeah, anyone who's doing work with it, basically counseling and consulting with people. I've had a number of nutritionists and dietitians who's done the course who found it very helpful. I have to say several of them have also done the eating disorders and OCD course so that they can also understand the mindset, because there are particular kinds of psychological mindsets that tend to go with people, particularly with the eating disorders, if you have those sorts of clients come to you. And as you know, as a nutritionist, often what you're taught to do is give people good advice. But if people get advice and they don't actually buy into it, if they're not intrinsically motivated, then it tends to fall on deaf ears. Or it's like a New Year resolution, right? It lasts for a few days or a few weeks, and then they fall off the wagon after a short time, if that sounds familiar to you. So yeah, if you have experience as a nutritionist, any of those sorts of helping professions, guidance professions, in the health professions, etc., then yes, the course is suitable for you. And I have had people from nutritional backgrounds on the course. And as I said, but several of them have opted to also do the OCD and eating disorders course. But that one is, I've actually had nutritionists and dietitians who've done that course without doing the CBT course, and they did get something from it, but they also said it was a lot more of catch up to do on the basics of CBT. So it's best to do the CBT first. That's why I run the CBT course first, and then I offer the other one as an optional the following month, because it gives you a lot more grounding in the techniques of how to apply the CBT interventions, the questioning process, and the models and the various tools and props that you can use in your sessions. I don't know how many of you can see me, but let me just see. I'll go so I can see myself. See, I use the props and tools. So, you know, I have a laughing monkey, for example, for someone who doesn't know how to crack a smile or to laugh. I won't switch it on now, but this monkey laughs very loudly and it throws itself about and rolls around. Someone who feels they get bullied by everyone, we've got some great things like tigers and stuff that they can have their inner tiger that can come forward and give them some strength. So, you know, I tell stories. I have an approach which, as I said, is about about adjusting what I do to help people. So in your nutritional setting, you might well have props that you could use. I brought over the first people to develop this gastric mind banding, you know, the hypnotherapy where you, instead of getting a bariatric surgery or having a gastric band fitted, you can actually do a combination of CBT and hypnotherapy to actually get your subconscious to react as if you've got a gastric band fitted to change your appetite functions. And they've got some brilliant props. The people who did that, we brought them over to do some training in Bahrain and in Dubai as well. And some people specialize in this, so they go to them in their clinic and do an intensive course with them. And they've got great props like bags with fat, you know, that look like fat. It's not real fat, but looks like fat, that are really powerful visual images that totally freak people out when they think that's what they're carrying around. You know, so they do things to engage the emotions of their clients as well as the logical reasoning. So that combination, as I said, of CBT with other things, particularly hypnotherapy, NLP, therapeutic NLP techniques, are very useful to get people's emotions engaged. Because remember, when we have a competition between logic, reason on the one hand, and imagination, fear, anxiety, passion, intensity, emotion on the other, this is always going to win unless we can get them to work together. Does that make sense to you in terms of your practice as a nutritionist?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So you probably answered your own question there, but I hope that helps. Anything else on that specifically, or is that sufficient?
I think so. So do you definitely recommend hypnotherapy as well?
I recommend hypnotherapy as an additional modality, but depending on what you want it for. See, in the CBT course, the diploma course that I teach, you will actually get, because I also have a very long-standing record as a hypnotherapist and hypnotherapy trainer and Harley Street practice and all that. So I introduce some hypnotherapeutic technique. And by the way, David is also, David Cato, I mentioned, CBT specialist, he's also a hypnotherapist. So we actually give some things like wording of scripts and hypnotherapy sessions that people can use within their CBT. Things like metaphors and story, some basic induction techniques. So although the diploma is a diploma in CBT, and that's the focus of it, I do actually throw in a fair bit, and we do a few practice closed eye sessions within the course. So if you don't want a whole training in hypnotherapy, you can get bits from that. If you decided you wanted to train as a hypnotherapist, obviously there are opportunities to do that, but any good hypnotherapy course should take at least an academic year. If you're offered anything that's just like you know, 4 weekends in a month or a week somewhere or something, and they offer you a diploma at the end of it, that is not clinical hypnotherapy. It teaches you some hypno tricks, it'll teach you some things you can do, but it wouldn't be sufficient to be a hypnotherapist. But as I said, if you just want some tools and techniques from hypnotherapy to incorporate into your practice as a nutritionist, great. If you're planning to leave nutrition and go into some kind of therapy eventually, then at some point you'll probably want to do a longer training in a modality that you might specialize in then. Do you have any thoughts about that, or are you happy being a nutritionist? Do you just want to bring some other tools in?
No, that makes sense. No, I think I would want to move on to something else as well in the future.
Yeah, so that's you know, when I first became a therapist full-time, I had a successful career in education. I worked in primary, secondary, but mostly in further education. I'd worked with older students, with mature students, in adult education, etc. And when I decided I had a good job, I was a section leader as a senior lecturer, and you know, it's secure, you get a pension and all the rest of it. You have the hours are challenging, but your actual teaching hours are limited. And I had trained and I'd done lots of counseling and sort of part-time stuff in my own time, you know, bits and pieces. And I'd done that because of my tutorial work, and some of the students I worked with had a lot of challenges, inner city students in London, etc. And so when I actually finally trained and qualified as a counsellor and therapist, I was very nervous about packing in full-time the job that I had.
Right.
And I was umming and ahhing about, am I being scared cat, you know, not jumping in full-time. And I actually went to have a reading with a parapsychologist. She was a woman who was a psychologist, but she also specialized in intuitive and kind of, if you like, psychic work. And after our session, she said to me, you know, it seems to me you've got very sensible, you know, you're intelligent, common sense, etc. You have a family, a mortgage, you have to think about these things. And she said, and yet you've also obviously got that drive to do this work. She said, a solution will come, but don't feel it has to be all or nothing. You can take your time. I went away feeling great relief. And it's one of those things, you know, where, as I said, although I'm running on logic and reason, I'm also open to all the other stuff, because I went back to my office, and on the filing tray with my, you know, mail in, on the top of the pile, there was a letter that I opened, and it was from the then Inner London Education Authority about their new Equal Opportunities programme in employment. And they were saying that people could actually apply to do job sharing, but they didn't want to be inundated because they needed to build a pool of people who are willing to job share. So they said, so if you want to apply for this, if you can find someone on the list that seems to meet your requirements or be a good match, or you know anyone, please let us know. And I had a look at this letter, and I had a look at the list, and one of the people on the list had a name that seemed very familiar to me. And I wonder if it's the same Sue, because it was someone who'd been up for the interview for my job. In education, it's horrendous. I won't give you the details, but you have a whole bunch of you that go through the long list, the short list, and then you're all together for a day or two, and it's really difficult trying to be competitive, and at the same time, you know, there are nice people there. But she and I bonded and got on very well, and we were both, apparently it turned out that I was their first choice, she was their second close choice, and if I'd refused the job or decided I didn't want to take it, they were going to offer it to her. And it turned out she was the person. She just had a baby, she'd had a year off, and she wanted to come back part-time for a year, but she said, I'll be honest with you, I do want to go back full-time in a year. And I said, well, I want to step out in a year and go full-time into therapy. So that's what we did. So, you know, sometimes there are ways to do that, but you take your time. And lots of my graduates have actually developed a part-time practice, develop their skills, their competence, and then they might find that they work in the field that they already know, but they go in the therapeutic way, or they may want a complete change and do something totally different. And sometimes they'll try different things out and then find what they want to do at the end of it. And it could be the same as they thought, or it could be something completely different. One of my graduates from way back when now in Dubai, she went on my recommendation and did a master's in positive psychology after training with us. She did the therapy training, NLP coaching, etc. And she is now a child psychotherapist who runs an extremely successful practice in Dubai, mostly doing group work, getting kids to mentor other younger kids. And she does a little bit of one-on-one work still, but mostly it's group work and working with parents. Now, when she first graduated, she thought she was going to work with sports and do performance training and enhancements and do therapy and coaching with people who are high performance athletes. And she did got mentored herself, and she worked with top athletes, kids and adults. But actually, she came full circle to working with parents and with kids eventually. So it's interesting how people's paths change as they change and they find different things they like to do. So good luck with your journey, however you go on it. And if you decide you'd like to sign up for the CBT course, remember what I said, you've got a 48-hour window where the early bird offer ended last week, but we're opening it up for this 48-hour period. So you'll be able to get the discount, but you need to sign on by Saturday at the latest to get that. Otherwise, it'll be the standard rate for anyone who signs up late. If you sign up in that time as well, you'll get on Sunday, I'll be sending out all the course materials, so the manuals and the preparatory materials, so you can get a heads up on what we're going to do. And you probably know it's being held over 2 weekends, next weekend and then the following weekend. And because I'm in Morocco 3 hours behind you, and I don't want to be up in the middle of the night, so we start at 11 your time, have a 2-hour session, have a break for lunch, and then work through till 7 with a short break in the afternoon. So that's the first weekend. Then you get a 2-week break, so you can reflect on the materials, think about them, prepare for the next one, and then we do the second one. And the exam, by the way, people ask me this, it's a scene exam. It's a scene exam, so we go through it on the last day, and then you have 4 weeks to complete and hand in your exam. And you need to pass it with a minimum rate that's set. If you don't pass, vast majority of people pass and pass very well, but occasionally someone doesn't quite make it, in which case they get the opportunity to review and to resubmit. And we've never had anyone yet who's not actually been able to make it through the exam. And as I said, the vast majority pass it the first time around. And then once you pass the exam, then you get your you get the certification, which is UK accredited, so it's got the logo of the International Council for Psychotherapists and David Cato's logo, as well as our own. So I don't know if you've got any other questions about that, but you can check it out. If you go onto our website, there's actually a whole page, or as I said, if you send me, you've got my contact details. If you send me your contact details, I can actually send you a detailed description of the course and what topics we cover, and there's an application form and all that as well. Okay.
Thank you so
Anyone
much.
else? You're very welcome. Anyone else? I think we've got a couple of you still there, hardy people. Anyone else got a question or observations before we wrap up? Okay, so if not, that means I've obviously hypnotized you and you're stuck in your chair and you just don't know how to say goodbye. You know, when we used to run, she's had to leave because she got an emergency and had to leave, but Sita, who came and joined us, who'd been to other things of ours before a few years ago, but she'll know what I mean when I say this. Sometimes when we have the face-to-face workshops, we do, you know, workshops or meet-up groups or whatever, introductory things, and at the end, we'd finish at about 9 usually, and then we'd have some around Q&As, and sometimes it'd be like 9:45, getting on to 10. And we developed a strategy where either myself or Phil, because he'd usually be there as well, would pop out and then come in and go, oh, they've served the meal up or whatever it is now, we need to go now, because people would just be there on their chairs, they just didn't want to leave. Maybe they were comfortable on their chairs, I don't know. But on the web, I don't just chat people up, but I do say if you have anything else to ask now, but otherwise we'll wrap up now because we've gone on for about extra half an hour or so after we finish.
Hi, Doctor. It was really very informative. Being a newbie, I found it very mesmerizing to learn, and I might not be using the right word here, but I learned.
No, mesmerizing is the same word as hypnosis.
Yeah, yeah, true. I had a real insight into what it is, but I just want to understand, because you say it is not for newbies. So do you have any other program? Because this I want to learn for myself and to help. 22 years I have been away from it. I'm a you wrote the message saying I'm a newbie homemaker for 22 years. Yes. I have been into Montessori training with kids from 3 to 6 years, but I have been away from the teaching process for quite some time. Yeah. And now this is for basically my children are all grown up, and I want to take up something where I can be of help. Basically, yeah. What you're wanting to do, if I can just sort of summarize that, is what we would call someone who wants to get an entry-level qualification to be able to become a professional practitioner. Now, as I said, in the past, we were doing that in a different format. And we did it for many years very successfully, but I reached a point where, and I'm a lifelong learner myself, so I reached a point sometimes where I think, no, I really need to change this. And I found that a lot of people were doing the one-year course and you know, they did a good job, but the ones who actually really were much more successful in developing a professional practice and all sorts of other things were the ones who did the 2 years. So we decided to actually move forward, and we would have started it by now, quite honestly, but because of this last 2 years, accreditation processes and everything are taking so long, it's crazy. So what we were planning to do, as I said, start either last year or the beginning of this or later this year. We've now decided that we should be ready to start in 23, like next year. We will have all our accreditations completed. Well, it's not a problem about getting the accreditation, it's a question of whether it's a level 5 or 6. Because we're doing it with the UK Professional Standards Authority, they have what they call levels 5 and 6. Level 5 is the equivalent to a degree, and level 6 is the equivalent to a postgrad qualification. It's not academic, right? It's professional, but it's that kind of standard. So the 2-year course will be basically the same format as when we did it 2 years, but in a completely different way the content's presented, and I think will be much better. So it will be 10 modules each year, each a weekend module, and then in between there's reading, study, research, videos to listen to, audio materials, all sorts of stuff. And we will right from the get-go be teaching
what we call integrative therapy, which means being eclectic, having the principles of client-centered counseling, Rogerian person-centered counseling. We'll have the introduction to CBT, and we'll have the basics of hypnotherapy right from the get-go. We'll introduce other things as we go, and then we start getting people to do practice outside of the class, sessions, as well as what we do in the live sessions online. And then by the end of 2 years, there'll be an exam at the end of the first year, the midterm exam, and then a final exam at the end, which again is a scene exam. We're not keen on testing people's short-term memory under stress. And that will include case studies and things like that. And then at the end of that time, then once a person's passed that, completed their 2 years, they will be receive a diploma in integrative psychotherapy and counseling, which will be accredited by the National and International Council for Psychotherapists, and will be at the level of, the top level of what the Professional Standards Authority in the UK, the Division of Health and Social Care. So you would be a UK accredited psychotherapist at the end of that training. So that's the sort of training that I think that you would probably want. As I said, sometimes people are already in the profession and want extra, but it's ideal for someone like you who's starting from first base, because then you get all your foundation level. For some people that might be like revision, but for you, you get everything you need right from the beginning. And we will probably later this year. I don't want to start recruiting to the course until we know for sure our starting date, because I've already done this. I have the calendar worked out 2 years running, and each time because of the delays, we had to put it back. But I'm pretty confident we'll be able to start it next year. And then, so if we get that in place, then we'll start recruiting later this year. And I interview people. They have a substantial interview, could be an hour, even 2, to make sure that they're aware of what the course involves. It's the right course for them. And then, and then that's it. We take it from there. And so that's a very sound, rigorous, good course. With many people who did the other model we did are very successful, are doing very well in their practices. Some work in the field, some work in similar fields, some run private practices, some work in schools as counsellors. The majority probably in the Middle East, work in private practice. Some work under the centres that come under the what do you call it? Community and Social Care Ministry, other Ministry of Social Care. Others come under the Ministry of Health. But that depends on what kind of other experience they've got. But yeah, it's a good career path to doing a job that, frankly, if I tell you, the guy who's the boss of the British National Council of Psychotherapy, which is the founding, and then there's the sister organisation, ICP, he said they did a survey and the majority of their members are seeing big increase in their workloads, including online, over the last 2 years, because of the number of people who are experiencing mental health difficulties, which is why I said, mental health crisis. It's a shame I lost that slide that had the figures, because I put them all, prepared them, but I mean, there's a 50% increase in the US in young women who are self-harming in the last 2 years. Suicidal ideation, the amount of problems, and we're going to see more, because we're going to see that the ripple effects of that with people with financial problems and all sorts. So, and I do, by the way, have some people who do pro bono work. I've got some people who are well enough off that they don't need to work, so they do charitable work, but others, they run a practice, they run a business, but they also take on a certain number of clients who just aren't in a position to help themselves. We had in Bahrain, we had a lady who used to go voluntary work in the what do they call them? The shelter, for abused housemaids who've been abused. They had the Philippine embassy had one, and the Sri Lankan embassy had one. And so she used to go in and do counselling and therapy free of charge for them, even though she earned money from working in the day. So, again, it's a profession that you've got choices about, which is great, because you can do it to earn money, you can do it to for charity purposes, you can do a combination, you can specialize in a particular field, or you can be a generalist. I mean, I think it's wonderful. And also, you can use those skills in anything else. People who've learned the good people skills can use them, whether in HR or teaching, or, you mentioned Montessori. There are so many different things you can do once you've got these skills that are what we would call transferable skills. So I think that would probably be the best route that I could advise you on.
Thank you, doctor.
Okay.
And wanted to understand if there are any other courses, because I understand that you're going to start it one day by 2023. So do you have any other small courses that it can be done?
At the moment, I'm a bit, I haven't got any dates I can definitely say, because last year I ran a few that I ran that Illuminations also referred people to do. We did Introduction to Energy Psychology. We did, I've offered them a foundation certificate in mindfulness, and also a couple of other things. We ran a short course on working with children and young people, which again was open to anyone interested in that field. So we've done a few, but the problem is actually the timetabling thing, because they've got so many different people that they work with. And so it's a question of working out, A, that we don't cross over and have them offering the same thing with different people, because that becomes, you know, obviously that's not sensible business-wise. And also in terms of the time for organizing things. We've had a few people asking Phil about, I mean, I teach NLP and coaching as well, but Phil leads on that one. So there are a few people interested in doing some NLP, which is a great preparation. Lots of people who come to us to train as therapists have actually started out by doing some NLP with us. So, you know, the best thing is, if you're interested, is to send me on the personal front, to the email I sent you, send me your name, send, you know, just the little thing you said that I'm interested in short courses, and then we can let you know if there's anything. And then the other thing you can do is that if you go to our website, you'll see that there's a thing, I told you about the free course. It's the 3-parter on career opportunities, the 6-part one, which is really deciding what's the best for you, what your strengths are and everything. And then there's also a link to some colleagues of ours, some associates who run something called Introduction to Positive Psychology. And that's an online course that you can do. And I'm not saying you would be able to go straight from that to doing the masters, because obviously a lot of people who do that course want to do the masters, but they've got a degree in other things or whatever. They might think you're suitable, I don't know. But a number of our graduates, having done the training with us, similar to what I've described to you, then go on to do the masters in positive psychology. And if they've done that introductory course first, they get a 10% reduction on the fees for the master's course, which is available to do online at a very reasonable price if people want to do that. So there's options. So as I said, get yourself in touch with us, get on our mailing list, we'll keep you posted. There's many, many short things you can do, umpteen things you can do around in Dubai, obviously, but people do this, that, and the other. But if you're talking about seriously developing a career pathway in therapy, there's very little available. In fact, I go so far as to say there's nobody actually teaching a professional practitioner course in integrative psychotherapy anywhere in the Middle East that I know of myself. Otherwise, I'd tell you about it.
Yeah, thank you, doctor, because I have been researching quite a few places and I wasn't able to find anything that was help to me. So yeah,
that's it. There's a few people teaching hypnotherapy and hypnosis, but I have to say, I'll be careful what I say, but if it's not actually meeting UK standards, and there's a very clear curriculum set for the UK for what we call the Professional Standards Authority that I mentioned to you. There's a curriculum. So for example, for hypnotherapy, there's a curriculum, there's contents, there's a structure, there's a minimum number of hours, there's all sorts of stuff. There's nobody in the Middle East that meets those criteria. And for NLP, there's hardly anybody teaching NLP that's teaching according to the Society of NLP. Richard Bandler, who's the guy who originally invented NLP and co-founded the NLP, the Society of NLP. Again, hardly anybody is trained with him, and nobody that I know of in the Middle East is actually trained as a coach trainer with him. So it's a bit tricky for us, because if we're in the UK, there's probably lots of things I could tell you could go and do, and people you could go to that I know that, you know, that their work is good. But in the Middle East, there's a great shortage of people with what I would call bona fide quality assurance qualifications. They might belong to an association, but a lot of those will be in India or I'm not looking at India, but, you know, they won't be the same sort of standards, or they'll have things like, for example, a lot of stuff on past life regression or spirituality, which again, I'm all for. As you know, I'm personally interested, but it's not what we would call clinical hypnotherapy. Doctors in the UK would not refer to someone who specialized in past life therapy. If someone's doing tarot readings or whatever, we actually had a thing recently from our professional association saying, you can put what you like in your own website, but make it clear any entry that you put on the NCP website, it must not say you know, tarot card reading, Reiki, blah, 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 because that's not considered to be psychotherapy. So we have to be very careful that we don't have people going, oh, lumping everything in together. As I said, nothing wrong with doing those things, but they are not the same as doing clinical psychotherapy, right? So I'm sure you've got the message because you've obviously done your homework, but yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we've just got Sana and Pravati, so I'm going to say bye-bye to you so that I can finish up some work in the office and then take a break. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you for being so persistent and patient and being attentive and engaging. It's been a pleasure, as always, to work with people, especially when it's live online rather than just downloading material. So I hope to hear from some of you again soon, and take care, stay well, and thrive. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Perfect.